Imagine standing at the base of a towering mountain range. The air is thick with moisture, and a dense, ghostly fog envelops everything around you. Visibility is limited to just a few feet as the fog swirls and dances with the slightest breeze. The mountain peaks, usually visible and grand, are hidden behind an impenetrable curtain of gray and white. Trees and shrubs appear as dark, shadowy silhouettes, their details lost in the haze. The fog muffles every sound, creating an otherworldly stillness. The trail ahead is mysterious and uncertain, as if it leads you into a forgotten realm. There is a hint of mystery in the unknown, and as you continue on, there seems to be movement around you. The shadows creeping, the sounds becoming more sharp, and the feeling that envelops you is direct in its message. You simply just don't belong. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. Hello, I am your host, Kayla, and welcome back. First and foremost, this is not the intended episode for this week. I'm sorry if you've been following me on Instagram. You may or may not have caught that I'm working on an episode with my dad. And I'll just tell you now, it's about the SS Edmund Fitzgerald. And I got everything prepared, and then I started talking to him about it and very quickly realized that what I had prepared was not up to par. And so I'm just taking a little bit extra time to do better, or be better, as Sam always says. And that episode is going to be released in 2 weeks. So next week's episode is a subscriber only episode. Then the week after that will be the story of the Fitzgerald. On the note of subscribers, Roy, welcome to Patreon. I'm so glad to have you join us there. And I'm, thankful for every single one of you who come back week after week and listen to these stories that I tell. It really means so much to me, and I cannot express in words how much I appreciate everyone being here and fully recognizing that I could not do this without each and every one of you. And semi-related, the story that I am telling today is actually a story that my uncle suggested to me. So in 1950, 21 passengers aboard a Douglas DC-3C plane lost their lives when it collided with a mountain. And the mystery that surrounded the events that caused the collision still stand a mystery today. A Douglas DC-3C plane is a pretty widely recognized plane, as it holds a significant impact in aviation, in both commercial aviation and military operations. Manufactured by the Douglas Aircraft Company in the year of 1936, the plane was designed with twin engines and is propeller driven. A propeller is a mechanical device with blades that rotate, creating a difference in pressure that produces thrust. This thrust pushes the plane forward. The propeller's spinning blades produces enough force to not just move the plane and determine direction, but also lift it from the ground. The Douglas DC-3C is a 64-foot 6-inch or 19.5 meters long, has a 95-foot or 29-meter wingspan, and the wingspan is roughly 987 square feet, which is roughly the size of a small house or an apartment. Though it is small, it is mighty and can take off with almost 10,000 pounds or 4,000 kilograms of additional load. This plane, depending on the specific one, has seating capacity for between 21 and 32 passengers, and this plane had a huge impact on commercial travel because with it, It became the first profitable passenger service that was not relying on mail subsidies. It was used in World War II for a variety of roles, but proved useful long after the war ended. On November 21st, 1950, there were 21 people on the plane, including 3 crew members who were pilots of bombers during World War II, and they were all well-versed in not just flying, but being in the air. Now, I'm going to name off the crew members for you, but I would like to mention, before I do that I found a couple of different resources that have different people named in different roles, or they just have someone listed as John Doe, but then a different source lists the person by names. And I'm telling you this because the list that I've accumulated may be incorrect, but I tried to combine the most reliable and best sources that I could to pull information of the correct names of these people. I have no intention to disrespect any of these people or their loved ones. Rather, my hope is to honor their memory by giving you their names. If anybody has a connection tied directly with this event and they know better than I do, please feel free to reach out. I am happy to correct myself and admit that I'm wrong. Especially in situations like this where there's just vague information available, and I would love to, if I've collected the wrong information, I would love to provide the correct information. So to start, we have Captain Charles Matthews, who was the pilot, and then First Officer Harold Tyson and aviation mechanic Ernest Stoops. The 18 passengers on board included parents and their children, and while I did find a list of their names, or at least the names claiming to be the list of passengers, I noticed pretty quickly that the names of the children did not match up with any of the adults. And so I feel fairly confident saying that the list is likely not correct, just because I can't imagine that not a single one of the children on the plane was flying with a parent. And especially because there are references to the children being with their parents, but then none of the names matched up. I did find and confirm that one of the passengers was Dr. Paul Flemings, who was the mission director of New Tribes Missions. And then there were 2 passengers who were young mothers with their children, and both of their husbands had actually been tragically killed in a different plane crash for a different mission trip in June of this same year. The passengers included a total of 10 adults and 8 children. The plane was owned by New Tribes Missions, and everyone on board was on their way to a humanitarian mission in South America, and this was the first leg of their trip. At roughly 3:15, the plane took off from Chico, California, intending to land in Billings, Montana. But as they flew west, the fog hovering over the mountains really just seemed to settle in and become more dense, and as they continued on, Captain Matthews was finding the visibility to be extremely poor. In an attempt to get some better visibility, he decided to descend to see if he could find any landmarks or get some sort of idea of where he was and what direction he needed to go. Again, this was in 1950. They did not have the same instruments that allow us to now know where we are flying and where we are going without having the use of visual landmarks to guide us. There was no GPS at this time. The combination of fog, the decreased altitude, and the lack of understanding of what laid ahead of them caused them to fly the plane directly into the east side of Mount Moran at 5:50 p.m. They crashed at 11,000 feet or 3,352 meters in elevation. Now, Mount Moran is located in the northern section of the Teton Range near Jackson Lake in the Grand Teton National Park. It was named after the artist who painted Western frontier landscapes, Thomas Moran. Thomas actually used his paintings of Yellowstone's landscapes, which included the geysers, waterfalls, and canyons, to bring attention to not just the public, but also lawmakers of this beautiful landscape. Thanks to his work, he was able to convince lawmakers to preserve the land and thus Yellowstone National Park. And therefore, the first national park was born in 1872. The mountain is a massive mountain, which attracts many climbers and mountaineers to climb to its peak, standing at an elevation of 12,610 feet or 3,844 meters, which makes it one of the tallest peaks in the Teton Range. There are several active glaciers on the mountain which can be seen from a distance, as well as a basalt intrusion, which is also known as Black Dike, which is a geological formation where molten magma from deep within the Earth's mantle pushes its way into pre-existing cracks and crevices and into the surrounding bedrock. This magma then cools and solidifies slowly beneath the Earth's surface, forming a rock that is rich in magnesium and iron and is dark in color. As the mountains are then pushed up and created, this rock begins to surface. While many mountaineers show up to climb the mountain, it is pretty difficult, making it less popular than the Grand Teton and some of the other mountains to the south. Part of this is due to the fact that the trails on Mount Moran have not been maintained for at least 20 years, meaning that you have to bushwhack to get to the base and then up into the alpine zone. The alternate route is to take a kayak or canoe on Lee Lake and then get onto the mountain from there. So the mountain is not only difficult to access, it's difficult to climb, and it often takes days to reach the base of the mountain before you actually start your trek up. But this has not stopped everyone. On June 22nd, 1922, LeGrand Hardy, Bennett McNulty, and Ben Rich made the first descent. They climbed over Skillet Glacier, which is a glacier that looks like a skillet, and this has become a popular route for climbers. And while there isn't an exact count for how many people have climbed Mount Moran since then, it has been climbed multiple times. But the terrain is not the only difficulty surrounding Mount Moran. It seems that no matter the weather pattern moving in, clouds will surround the mountain in a heartbeat, and the fog limits visibility to nearly nothing. On this November evening, as the plane circled the area trying to find a landmark that could indicate where they were or where they needed to go, a park ranger stepped outside his cabin at about 5:45 p.m. He could see the silhouette of the plane beneath a heavy layer of clouds as it circled, but then as it climbed back into the sky, it struck him as odd that the plane had no lights on, which was the first clue that we have to understanding what could have happened on this fateful flight. It is clear, based on our knowledge of the crewmen on board and their skill set, that the electrical system had failed. The last radio contact that anyone had with the plane was at 3:48, which was roughly half an hour after it took off. And this communication indicated that everything was going smooth. Of course, though, this was about 2 hours before the crash, and without an electrical system, there would be no way for the pilot or crew members to radio for help or let anyone know that they were in distress. It was no more than a few minutes after the ranger saw the plane climb back into the sky when an explosion rippled outwards through the air, and Mount Moran caught fire. Billings, Montana, which was the plane's intended destination, is roughly 166 flight miles or 267 kilometers away, and this would take about 50 minutes for a plane to cover the distance. But when the plane failed to arrive in Montana, a search and rescue was initiated. The pieces of the puzzle took a couple of days to figure out, but it was thanks to farmers near Mount Moran who saw the fire on the mountain and then reported the fire to their local authorities that helped answer the question of where on earth this flight went. The farmers could see the fire from their fields, and while the fire season has absolutely shifted in recent years, in the 1950s, a wildfire in late November was unheard of. In addition to this, the fire was too big to be a campfire, so it had to be something big and it had to be something bad. The connection did not take long to make, though. The area the plane crashed in was extremely difficult to reach. On November 22nd, park ranger Blake Van Water and alpinist mountaineer Paul Petzold, along with 2 other mountaineers, started their climb on Mount Moran to investigate the crash. But because of a storm, they had to turn back. Not just once, but twice. It was not until 2 days later, on November 24th, that they finally reached the wreckage. The mountain was covered in snow, at times as deep as their waist, and while the clouds felt heavy and the wind blew across the area in a sustained 30 to 40 miles per hour, or 48.3 to 64.4 kilometers per hour, snow did not fall from the clouds. The temperatures hovered just around the freezing point. It took these 4 expert climbers 8 hours to reach the wreckage and find that there were no survivors. They found that the fuselage, or the main body of the plane, was split open, the seats had been ripped out of the plane, and the left wing was completely missing. Blake received the Distinguished Service Honor Award, which was the highest commendation in the Interior Department that could be given at the time, and this was because he risked his own life to climb this horrendously difficult mountain in winter conditions. They knew that there would be no survivors. He just wanted to be able to tell the families what happened and provide them with some sort of answers and some sort of closure. Because of the area the plane crashed in, they determined it was impossible to recover either the plane or any of the bodies, especially because in the 50s, they did not have the same specialized gear that we have today. Traveling across snow, ice, overhangs, glaciers, crevasses, and nearly vertical angles made it impossible for Blake, Paul, and the other 2 to even consider bringing down 1 person, let alone 21. If you were to climb the mountain today, you would find that the wreckage is still there. Over the years, though, the debris has been scattered and shifted down onto Skillet Glacier, mostly due to avalanche activity. But still, if you climb in this area, you are expected to respect this graveyard with peace and leave everything where it lays to honor those who lost their lives. The families and the community tied to this flight were left in a state of shock. New Tribe's mission had now lost its second plane, killing 21 more individuals who were missionaries and also their founder. Despite this, the mission continued its work, trusting in resilience and faith to see them through. Although this incident did bring a sobering reminder of the risk these missions held. But changes and awareness in safety began not just for the missionary, but also for aviation overall. It took some time, but this flight highlighted the need for increased weather forecasting and the ability to communicate changes to those around the world and those who were in the air, which allowed for better technology to develop, more accurate weather predictions, and the ability to not just communicate the weather forecast, but also to communicate with more remote areas in general. The training of pilots and emergency protocol began to become more comprehensive so that navigation in mountainous terrain would pose less of a risk. This flight and subsequent crash was used in simulation and practical exams to improve flight methods. Of course, with the improvement of weather forecasting and safety also came better technology and a higher understanding of how planes fly over mountains and how the terrain affects weather patterns and how the route could be changed to provide a safer but likely less direct of a flight. This also extended to aviation policies and regulation for how and when pilots were allowed to fly. And then search and rescue was also able to use this event as a lesson and how they could establish better communications, response times, and how to handle these incredibly difficult and nearly impossible to reach areas to provide assistance to anyone who survived or investigate for answers to provide some semblance of closure. This crash serves as a reminder that sobers anyone climbing to the mountains that aviation has not always been safe. Climbing these mountains may lead you to an area where numerous people lost their lives. Collectively, because of this incident and others, aviation safety, technology, and much more improved and has led us to the relative safety in the air that we have today. The evening of November 21st echoes the impact of what was left behind in the silence of Mount Moran. The dense fog and jagged peaks create a ghostly presence that envelops visitors in the stillness of the mountain that surrounds them. The heavy atmosphere can be brushed off as the altitude, but likely the weight of the 21 lives lost is a solemn reminder that the lives were never recovered from the foggy and icy grips of Mount Moran. Their story endures in the whispers of the wind and in the shadows that cast out across the rugged terrain. Mount Moran provides them with a legacy that is led on by those enthralled by nature, aviation, and the dark stories that pull the two together. Thank you for listening today. As a reminder, coming Saturday is the Girl Gone Running series. I hope you listen there. I hope you enjoy and have a great rest of your day. Bye. What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.